Hello, good afternoon. So this is something a little different for me in that it is not Business Central related, but if you follow me on Twitter or you've seen, I've made a few other videos about networking stuff. I kind of enjoy it. It can be very interesting. It can also be very frustrating and challenging, primarily because I don't know what I'm doing really. So I'm networking novice very much, but I'm very slowly learning piece by piece, issue by issue. I generally understand the basics, but when it comes to more firewall and traffic management and more corporate or enterprise grade networking and security, that is an entire huge universe of knowledge that I really don't have. So I'm kind of taking the DIY path to slowly learn some of this stuff. And now that I kind of have some minimal competence with my new firewall, I am slowly learning how to do certain things and how to detect certain things and what it can and can't do. And this was an interesting challenge that I've had over the last year. So I thought I would, which I think I have finally semi-conquered. So I thought I would just share that in case you are a fellow networking nerd and enjoy this type of stuff. Let me know. And if you have any suggestions on how to figure this stuff out easier, better, or like different techniques, I am all ears because I am sure I'm doing this the hard way. But so the concept for this talk is restricting outbound traffic is hard. It's one thing to block incoming traffic, incoming attacks, denial of service, whatever. That's one challenge, but you can kind of block that. That's kind of conventional for firewalls. But what is really interesting is if you're trying to restrict or block outbound traffic, which can be just as dangerous and just as malicious as unrestricted inbound traffic, shall we say. And I'm slowly learning about this, and it is outbound traffic as a threat or as a vector for a problem is really insidious. So it's fascinating to learn more about this and how hard it is to control, restrict, or stop this. So just in the context of this, what I've done recently is this is primarily around what I would generally call an HTTP proxy or a network proxy. And the idea is that a device that makes it onto my network is able to proxy out. So it's connecting to some host outside of my network. It's able to proxy all traffic out. And that can cause some problems. Now, in my case, it's part annoyance, part security issue. And it's also a control issue. So when a device on my network can proxy out, as far as I could tell, I lose any control over that device. They might as well just walk in my network and do whatever they want. So it is a problem as far as I can tell. So a few challenges that I had is one, noticing the problem. I just happened to notice because I happened to see the odd behavior of a device under my control, meaning I could access the device. Now, there are people who come to my house and visit, and my firewall just goes berserk because those devices are attempting to connect to foreign VPNs. And I suspect, I don't know if that's legitimate or malware, but it's really shady stuff. So I'm now noticing that. But the only reason I noticed this is because I was able to watch activity on the device. If I wouldn't have done that, I would have no idea. And all the other people who have these devices, which I'll explain, they have no idea they essentially have a Trojan horse in their home network. So noticing the problem was the biggest challenge. Then once I noticed it, I was like, well, how do I observe what it's doing? Like I know something's going on. How do I see specifically what this device is trying to do in terms of proxying out? And then once I figure out what it's doing, what it's connecting to, how do I block that? And all of these were interesting challenges. So, and then on a related note, this morning, I noticed this video in my YouTube feed, and it's on a channel called Computerphile. And, you know, they have some interesting topics about stuff I kind of know, but I learn a little bit. When I saw this, I was like, aha, this is right up my alley. Hacking out of a network. And he talks about various methods of proxying and tunneling and exfiltrating data. And it's pretty challenging. He doesn't really mention the challenge of preventing it. It's more just if you wanted to do that, how would you go about doing it? And it really raised some interesting questions. So with that, let me switch over to the malicious device in question. And you may say, Steve, that looks like an iPad. That's correct. And you're like, it's a pink background. It's my daughter's iPad. How malicious can this thing be? Well, I have I have a network firewall, and I use Pi-hole DNS to block ads, malicious domains, and various other things for convenience and security. So I'm kind of invested in this whole network security thing. And I go on this iPad, and one of the challenges having kids, you may know, is instead of doing homework on the iPad, the perfect child, I'm sure, little angel halo above their head, may spend some time on YouTube. So I wanted the ability to restrict access to YouTube, which is a whole nother challenge, which I'll mention at the end. I wanted to restrict access to YouTube on this device. So between these hours, don't allow it, and don't allow access to YouTube or these websites after 9 p.m. because I want my daughter to sleep and not sneak down and get on her iPad and watch YouTube, which she's never done before, of course. Now you might say, well, why don't you just use parental controls on the iPad? I would love to. However, this is an iPad that I purchased through the school district for school use. And when I purchase it from the school district, they image it with their school district image with the apps the student needs, and it is locked down using some service. I looked it up and found out what it was, but I forget the name. And it is locked down such that there are 0 parental controls on this iPad. So I cannot restrict any apps. I cannot restrict login times. I cannot restrict screen time, websites, anything. I have 0 control, 0 restrictions on this iPad. My daughter can do absolutely anything at any time. There's no passcode, nothing. Really annoying as a parent if you've had to deal with this. So, okay. So I wanted to restrict YouTube because I can't do it through parental controls. So I could potentially do it through networking. Okay. Well, then if you pull up New York Times here, you might notice something about this web page. One, it's loading really slowly. And then 2, you notice these ads? Well, on my network, I have no ads because I use Pi-hole to block ad servers and ad domains. And yeah, so I'm like, that's kind of weird. Ads are not being blocked on this device. Next, this is an Italian website. Not only does it have really obnoxious ads, but it is ansa.it. Well, I have geo restrictions, geo blocking on my firewall, and Italian domains or websites or whatever servers in Italy should be blocked by my firewall. It's not happening. So what is going on here? It's like, okay, let me see if I can figure this out. So if I go into settings, I notice that under the network settings, apparently, and I don't really check for this, but there is a proxy setting. It's not here. So I looked up online how to set a proxy setting on an iPad because I figured that was what's going on. It's bypassing all of my network security. I don't see the setting here. I don't have access to it. It's locked out. Huh. Okay. So how do I figure out what's going on here? So I went into my firewall and looked at the logs. So here's the system log for the firewall, and I'm going to refresh this web browser, have it reload this Italian website. And now I'm going to refresh the firewall log, and I'm going to filter based on the IP address of this iPad. You notice something strange here? Where is it? Over there? Zero traffic. My firewall sees zero traffic from this device, essentially. Zero block traffic, nothing. Kind of interesting. Let's go to the Pi-hole. Let's take a look at the query log. So I'm going to refresh this web page again on the iPad, and then I'm going to refresh the query log in Pi-hole. And this was at one. Oh, okay, so interesting. So I got Apple, iCloud, and a few other things. I'm like, okay, there's no ANSA.it DNS request going on. Now at the time, I didn't notice these other entries in the log. It didn't dawn on me. So I've since learned that. But I thought, okay, I have no traffic showing up on my firewall. Nothing is being blocked. What's going on? So then I went to Tools and Monitors, and what's one nice feature, there are a few flaws in this SonicWall to say the least, but one nice feature of this firewall is that it has built-in packet capture, something I didn't have, I don't think, on my prior firewall and router. So I have a packet capture set up to capture traffic of this IP address for this iPad, and I'm going to start the capture. I'm going to refresh this, going to refresh this, and I'm going to refresh YouTube in the browser here. Okay, so I've got some traffic, right? So I'm going to stop the capture. Well, let's take a look at this traffic here. How do I do this? Well, we see destination 106, that's the IP, but you notice something here? The source is almost always the same IP, 204.102.40.250. What's going on here? That's kind of strange. I'm not seeing different websites. I'm not seeing any destinations. It's like all the same thing. So I was really puzzled by this. Like, what's going on? Well, let's grab this, if this will stop scrolling. And I'm going to do reverse DNS lookup. And so I went over here and I said, well, let's see what this IP is. Do a search, and we see this is the school district K through 12 domain. Aha. I had found their proxy. So as I suspected, the iPad was configured with an HTTP proxy. All traffic for this device, as far as I could tell, except for maybe some local things that are, for whatever reason, bypassing it, all traffic's being routed through this proxy, completely bypassing any restrictions I have on my firewall for outbound traffic, and completely bypassing my internal DNS servers where I have Pi-hole blacklist set up to restrict access, prevent ads, stay away from malware sites. And just to show you the one problem with this is, okay, you say, well, that's ads, no big deal, and yeah, no big deal. So it's bypassing your firewall, but you know, how hard can it be, or how bad can it be? So my test for the security of the network or proxy or whatever I'm on is, can I go to nytimes, not .com, but .cm? So this is my current standard because I accidentally typed this in once. And watch what happens. nytimes.cm redirects to all sorts of shady sites. And it's like this random, goes to random locations. And sometimes it'll go here. Sometimes it'll redirect to an app in the Apple App Store. Sometimes it'll go to an obvious phishing site. So this is a super, super shady website that I use, or domain name that I use to check to see how secure this a network is for checking against malware sites. Clearly, the school district does very little to prevent this. So I do not want this device on my home network. It is sketchy, needless to say. Now, I have since learned a few things. So first of all, let's jump back to here. So I have since realized that I could have potentially detected the proxy access here where it says proxy a.abcusd k12caus. So that's one way that I now know I can potentially catch a DNS lookup through my DNS server. But if that IP address is already cached on the device, I may not have seen these entries. Sorry, I don't know what side I'm on. I may not have seen these entries in Pi-hole. So it appears that certain DNS requests, the initial proxy request is going through Pi-hole, but subsequent requests, once it has an IP, goes straight to the IP. Second thing is, I have learned that I can go to a website like What Is My IP? Or I just learned about this great website, ifconfig.co, and it gives you your public IP and information about that IP address, that net block. So I know that this 204 address is not my public IP address. And if I scroll down, I see the host name is the school district. So there's the proxy right there. Now, it is not the same one that showed up in Pi-hole. So you notice Pi-hole calls it proxy a.abcusd. So that's the DNS lookup. But reverse DNS shows an IP address variant for the domain name, IP204x102, etc. So it was a little tricky finding what the domain name, the fully qualified domain name was for the proxy being used, because I can't see it on the iPad. So I first found the IP address through a packet capture, and then I slowly pieced together what the FQDN was. So now that we know this, like now that I kind of got a feel for what's going on, what do we do about it? So first of all, I thought, okay, let me go in here, and I have an object set up in the SonicWall firewall. And if you want to implement a rule, say to block a website or block an address or restrict access for a given device, you can do that through an object. And so I set up an address object, a custom address object, and I started with a host because I only knew the IP address at the time. So I set this up. I subsequently realized what was going on with the domain name, and you see here I set up an FQDN object for the fully qualified domain name of the proxy. So I've got belt and suspenders covered just in case it hits the IP address or hits the domain name. I think internally the firewall is doing some type of resolution, so it'll block either way, but I just left both rules in. So now I can go to an address group, and I go to a restricted sites rule that I've set up, and I'm going to say, okay, ABCUSD, both entries, I'm going to add that to the restriction group. And you notice I had YouTube in here, wasn't blocking YouTube on the iPad. So I'm going to save. So now let's see what happens. So I have just blocked access to that proxy. The iPad should not be able to connect to that proxy at all. And I wasn't sure what would happen. I thought this might just shut down all network traffic on the iPad. Let's take a look. So if I go back here, let's just go to newyorktimes.com, not the malware phishing site. If I refresh, New York Times refreshes, but notice something? There's no ads. So banner at the top is empty. There's no ads. And let's go to a notorious ad-filled website, msn.com. I'm sure there are worse. But you'll notice there's the ad choice banner at the top and the ad choice block on the left. It's just an empty white square. So now that confirms that my Pi-hole ad blocking is working, so the DNS requests are coming through. So let's take a look and just verify that. So I'm going to refresh MSN. I'm going to refresh nytimes.com. And if I go to my query log, I'm going to go to 100, 106. And you see that nytimes.com, meter service, media.net, bing.com, adsystem.com, I'm starting to finally see traffic here. And then if I go back to my firewall, now that I blocked access to that proxy, it looks like the iPad is falling back to use the default network configuration information, which is fantastic for me because I was kind of afraid it would shut down the device and she wouldn't be able to do homework if it didn't have access to proxy, but that is not the case. So I'm going to refresh the firewall log and I'm going to go to YouTube, New York Times, Italian website, and 100.106. And maybe it's going to take a second. Wonder if it's caching. So it should log an alert for the Italian website. Oh, another thing I learned. The iPad will have some caching, right? So it has some DNS caching. So the trick that I read is that you go into airplane mode, you enable airplane mode, and that's the simplest way to clear the DNS cache and have it reconnect and reestablish that. So let's see if that works. Okay, so now I'm going to go back to the website. Fascinating. I wonder if this is not being hosted out of Italy. So I use an app that I know is hosted in a country that I block, and it is called Fast Keys. Great software, by the way. So Fast Keys automation. Maybe I'm allowing it. Anyway, Okay, so I'm failing to demonstrate that, but we are seeing that ads are being blocked. I am seeing DNS requests on my network. Trying to think of a website that I think I block, let's say Thailand. So Thailand news. Bangkok Post. Let's see if that's blocked. Okay, so I think that should trigger the GeoIP restrictions. Am I doing something wrong here? There we go, finally. Oh, fascinating. So I think the reason I'm not seeing it is because the request is going from the iPad to the Pi-hole, and it's actually the Pi-hole DNS server here that is performing the DNS lookup. And so it is upon DNS lookup that the firewall is catching the GeoIP restriction and blocking that. So my 25.7, that is my primary Pi-hole DNS server, so it's blocking that. So the short answer is the activity on the iPad is now triggering GeoIP restrictions, and it is being blocked. As you can see, this is just not loading, it's just hanging. So anyway, it works. Now, if I go back to YouTube, I should have a restriction on YouTube, but YouTube is very, very difficult to block, I have learned. So anyway, so that was the journey of trying to detect the presence of an HTTP proxy, identifying the server, the proxy server it is connecting to on the device, and then blocking it. And it turned out to be kind of a simple or crude block rule based off of fully qualified domain name and IP address. And I don't know if there's a better way, but in the case of the Sonic wall, I've asked my managed security provider if there's a better way to do this, but the primary way, as far as I could tell, that SonicWall handles this is under security services and app control. So they have a signature database that gets updated, presumably, and gets maintained by them as part of your rather expensive annual maintenance. And here you have signatures. And one of the categories is proxy access. And if you go in here, you will see like NordVPN, ExpressVPN, and Tor, HTTP proxy, and clearly none of these were blocking the school district HTTP proxy with an iPad. And as far as I know, I cannot add a custom rule, and I wouldn't even know how to assemble one in this firewall. So that's a challenge. So for now, I'm low tech, blocking the fully qualified domain name and IP address. But I think these signatures are based off of DNS lookups, certain IP addresses. I don't, and other parameters like it's an HTTP GET to this domain or this IP address. I don't think it is doing much deeper analysis. It's not doing, packet analysis to understand what's going on, because most of this stuff is HTTP. So anyway, so I'm not aware of a way to do this. I did ask on a firewall forum, how do companies detect outbound proxy access, outbound tunneling? And short of blocking ports or crudely blocking domains or things like this list, apparently there is no easy way to do this via firewall. And the response I got is that it's typically done via traffic capture and log analysis. So snort and logging, and you have overall broad traffic analysis to detect trends or patterns in the data that may indicate high risk activity. And there's also machine learning being applied to this in order to detect some anomalies among or unusual traffic patterns. It may not be something a human would even notice, no matter how hard you look at those logs. So very, very challenging problem in terms of how you detect outbound connections that are not legit and how you block them. Really, really difficult problem. And all of this started with a really annoying school iPad. This is like a nightmare device on my network. And yeah, unfortunately, nothing I can do about it. But I'm very proud. Found the proxy, I blocked it, and now I can have some restrictions on it. I'd love to have just the standard parental controls, but I can't get that. And so now I'm able to improve the security and have limited ability to lock down certain things. So with that, where is it? That was a networking journey. And I have more interesting stuff that I may research in terms of outbound traffic and data exfiltration, which is just a really fascinating topic. And I'm also thinking of building a home network lab. So at the moment, I don't know how to set up something on my home network that I can test all this, different firewalls, different rules, things like that without screwing up my main network. So I'm watching a few videos to figure out how to do that. I'm looking at, the SonicWall firewall is okay, but I found some glaring flaws, weaknesses with it. So I'm looking into pfSense and Untangle as two different firewall options. And I want to be able to set these up as test devices. I don't want to spend $1,000 or $2,000 on these things and then spend a year learning them as an academic exercise. So I want to just set up, if they have free versions, I want to set those up on VMs or I don't know, not Raspberry Pis probably, but some type of small, inexpensive device, and have a test home network where I can compare pfSense versus SonicWall versus Untangle and see how they compare. I don't think I want to buy another commercial firewall. A friend recommends Fortinet, but as far as I can tell, there's pros and cons to every single platform. And I don't think any of the commercial firewalls that I've looked at have the internal native logging capability that I would like. You always seem to have to pay for and license their extra logging and network on log analysis tools, which is super annoying. So I want to look into pfSense and Untangled in order to see if they have better native logging without bolting on some type of a reporting package. But anyway, that's my journey. And yeah, have a good one.